What does it feel like when the people who brought you into this world look at your dreams and laugh? Not cruelly, not maliciously, but casually, the way you laugh at something that simply doesn't deserve to be taken seriously. That question sat in Maya's chest for 5 years before she finally had an answer. And the answer didn't come in words. It came in a number on a bank screen that her mother accidentally saw while borrowing her phone to make a call. But we're not there yet. We need to go back to the dinner table first because that's where everything actually started. It was a Sunday. The kind of Sunday that immigrant families treat like a small ceremony. Good dishes out, everyone present. The smell of something slow-cooked filling every room. Maya was 22. Freshly out of college with a marketing degree, she had already quietly decided she wasn't going to use the way her parents imagined. Priya was 27, 3 years into her law career. And the way their parents said her name that evening carried a specific kind of reverence. The reverence reserved for someone who had fulfilled every silent prayer spoken on their behalf. Priya this, Priya that. Priya's firm. Priya's cases. Priya's future. And then someone asked Maya what her plan was. She said it plainly, without drama, without a rehearsed pitch. She was going to build an online business. She was already testing products, already studying the market, already spending nights learning things no classroom had ever bothered to teach her. She believed in it the way you believe in something when you've already seen the first crack of light under the door. She wasn't asking for applause. She just answered honestly. The laugh came from her father first. Not loud, not mean, just automatic. The kind of reaction that doesn't even consult the brain before leaving the body. Her mother smiled in that particular way that means we'll talk about this later, which actually means we will never speak of this seriously ever. And Priya, to her credit, said nothing, but the silence had a shape to it, and that shape was pity. Here is what nobody tells you about being dismissed by your own family. It doesn't feel like rage in the moment. Feels like the floor dropping half an inch. Just enough to throw your balance without anyone else noticing you stumbled. Maya didn't storm off. She didn't make a speech. She picked up her fork and finished her food, and somewhere between that moment and the drive home, something hardened in her that would never go soft again. Now here is the part that should make you uncomfortable, because it's the part most people never examine. That laugh her parents let out? It wasn't born from cruelty. It was born from love wrapped so tightly in fear that it had stopped being able to breathe. They had sacrificed too much, crossed too many borders, absorbed too many losses to watch their younger daughter bet on something they couldn't hold in their hands or explain to their friends. They needed Priya's path for Maya because Priya's path had a name, a salary bracket, and a straight line they could trace with their finger. What Maya was describing had none of those things, and to people who had built their entire survival on certainty, the unknown didn't look like opportunity. It looked like a threat. But here's what that dinner table moment didn't account for. It didn't account for what Maya had already set in motion before that Sunday. It didn't account for what she had been quietly building in her bedroom at 11 o'clock at night while everyone assumed she was scrolling her phone. And it absolutely did not account for how far that quiet, unhurried, completely underestimated girl was about to go. Because the first sale had already happened, and nobody in that room knew. Have you ever watched someone receive praise they were slowly suffocating inside of? Because that is the most precise way to describe what Priya's life actually looked like from the inside. And Maya was one of the very few people positioned close enough to see it, though it would take her years to fully understand what she was witnessing. From the outside, Priya had constructed something genuinely impressive. By 27, she had a corner office in a mid-size firm, a salary that made their parents mention her name with a particular straightening of the spine, a LinkedIn profile that collected congratulations the way a well-placed net collects rain. She dressed the part, spoke the part, performed the part with a discipline that honestly deserved its own kind of respect. At every family gathering she was presented like evidence that the sacrifices had been worth it, that the journey from one country to another had produced exactly the return it was supposed to. Priya was the proof of concept, and she wore that role without ever once publicly complaining. But here is the thing about proof of concept: it has to keep proving. Every month, every quarter, every performance review. The validation never accumulated into something Priya could finally rest on because the moment she stopped delivering it, she sensed the structure around her would shift. So she kept going. Earlier mornings, later nights, weekends that disappeared into briefs and correspondence, and the particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't show up on your face until one random Tuesday it shows up everywhere at once. Maya noticed it first in small things. The way Priya's voice went flat when someone asked if she loved her work. The practiced 2-second pause before she answered questions about her future at the firm. The way she'd reach for her phone the moment a family dinner got too celebratory about her achievements, not to capture the moment, but to escape back into something that demanded nothing emotional from her. These weren't dramatic signals. They were hairline fractures in an otherwise polished surface. Easy to miss if you weren't paying the right kind of attention. What nobody at those dinners ever asked Priya, not once, not in any form, was whether she was happy. They asked if she was busy. They asked about cases, about colleagues, about whether she was thinking about making partner. Happiness wasn't part of the assessment criteria, because happiness didn't have a title attached to it. And Priya, who had been trained since childhood to convert her parents' hopes into her own goals, had never really developed a clear answer to that question anyway. She had optimized so completely for external markers that the internal ones had gone quiet years ago. Now hold that image in your mind, because here is where it gets genuinely interesting. While Priya was being handed every congratulation and every proud glance at every family occasion, Maya was sitting 3 feet away building something in near total silence. No announcements. No LinkedIn updates. No salary conversations at the dinner table. Just a laptop, a strategy she'd been refining for months, and a bank account that was starting to behave in ways she hadn't told a single person about yet. The contrast wasn't dramatic in that moment. It was invisible. And invisible is exactly how Maya needed it to stay for now. Because the dangerous thing about being underestimated is that it only works in your favor as long as nobody recalibrates their expectations. The moment they start paying attention, the advantage disappears. Maya understood this instinctively. She had watched Priya carry the weight of everyone's attention her entire adult life. She had seen what that weight did to a person's shoulders over time. She had absolutely no intention of picking it up before she was ready. Have you ever been so certain about something that the certainty itself scared you? Not because you doubted it, but because you knew that if you were wrong, there would be no soft landing? That is the specific kind of conviction Maya was operating on at 22. And it is important you understand the texture of that conviction before you understand what she was actually building, because the two things are inseparable. The online business she had described at that dinner table wasn't a vague idea she'd stumbled across in a YouTube rabbit hole the week before. She had been studying e-commerce and digital product models for almost 8 months before she said a single word about it out loud. She had read case studies, tested small paid ad campaigns with money she'd saved from a part-time job, studied consumer behavior patterns, watched markets move, watched products trend and fade and trend again. She had failed twice already. 2 products that went nowhere, 2 small losses she absorbed privately and treated as tuition rather than defeat. By the time her father laughed at that dinner table, Maya was already on her 3rd attempt. And the 3rd attempt was behaving differently. But none of that context existed in anyone else's version of the story. To her parents, to Priya, to every extended family member who periodically asked about her career plans, Maya was a girl with a marketing degree who was doing something on the internet. That phrase, doing something on the internet, carried a specific dismissiveness in households like hers. It was the career equivalent of saying you were figuring things out. It meant nothing concrete, nothing respectable, nothing that could be translated into a conversation at someone else's dinner table. The social weight of that dismissiveness is something that deserves a full moment of examination, because it wasn't just coming from her family. It was coming from everywhere. Friends from university were posting about graduate schemes and internship conversions and entry-level salaries that came with health insurance and a manager who knew their name. Every one of those posts carried an unspoken metric, and by that metric, Maya was behind. Visibly, measurably, socially behind. She was not in an office. She had no title. She had no team. She had a desk in her childhood bedroom, a Shopify dashboard, and a growing obsession with profit margins that she discussed with exactly nobody. Here is what that period actually required of her that nobody ever credits, and this is the part that separates people who eventually break through from people who fold before the story gets interesting. It required her to be completely immune to the social narrative running around her without becoming bitter about it. Bitterness would have been the easiest response available. Resentment was right there, free, accessible, completely justified. But Maya had made a calculation early on that resentment was expensive in a way that didn't show up immediately. Costs you focus first. Then it costs you clarity. Then it costs you the compounding hours that quiet, undistracted work produces. She couldn't afford any of those losses. So she made a choice that looked from the outside like indifference but was actually something far more disciplined. She simply kept going. The third product launched on a Wednesday morning in October. She had spent 11 days on the product research, 4 days on the ad creative, and approximately 40 minutes allowing herself to feel nervous about it. By Friday evening, the first real sale notification hit her phone, then another, then 3 over the weekend. Small numbers, genuinely small, but the pattern underneath them was not small at all. It was the specific pattern she had been watching for across 8 months of study and 2 failed attempts. She screenshot it, closed her phone, told nobody. The road nobody respected had just posted its first sign. What is the exact moment a person stops being someone who is trying and becomes someone who is genuinely considering stopping? Because there is a precise moment, not a gradual fade, not a slow erosion, but a specific night where the gap between where you are and where you need to be stops feeling like a challenge and starts feeling like a verdict. Maya had that night. And it arrived 8 months after those first promising sales, during a stretch of time she has never described in full to anyone, until now. The third product's early momentum had done something psychologically dangerous. It had raised her internal threshold. The first few sales had felt like proof. Then the sales plateaued. Then a supplier issue ate into her margins in a way that turned a profitable month into a break-even one. Then she made a scaling decision on her ad spend that she hadn't fully pressure tested, and watched 3 weeks of careful profit dissolve in 11 days. The numbers didn't collapse dramatically. They just went quiet. And somehow quiet was worse than dramatic because dramatic gives you something to react to. Quiet just sits there, asking you whether you actually know what you're doing. Meanwhile, the world around her kept moving in its organized, credentialed, socially legible direction. A cousin announced a promotion. A university friend closed a graduate scheme with a salary that got texted around the family group chat with a string of celebration emojis. Priya made junior partner, and the dinner held in her honor had a cake with her name on it. Maya sat at that dinner and smiled at exactly the right moments and felt something she didn't have clean language for at the time. Not jealousy, not resentment, but a particular species of loneliness that comes from building something real that nobody around you can see yet. The night everything almost ended was a Tuesday in February. She remembers the month specifically because the heating in her bedroom had been unreliable all winter, and she'd been working in a hoodie for weeks, which sounds like a minor detail until you understand that it had become a daily physical reminder of how unglamorous the reality of her situation actually was. She had opened her analytics dashboard expecting nothing and found something worse than nothing. A return request that, combined with her current ad costs, pushed her monthly figures into the red for the first time. Not dramatically, just enough. Just enough to make the question unavoidable. She sat with that question for 4 hours. Not spiraling, she was too tired to spiral. Just sitting with it, honestly, the way you sit with something when you finally stop performing optimism for yourself. She thought about the degree gathering relevance in a folder on her desktop. She thought about a job listing she bookmarked 3 months ago and never applied for, telling herself she was keeping it as a backup without ever admitting she was keeping it as an exit. She thought about how much simpler everything would become if she just made one phone call and stepped back onto the path everyone had already paved for her. And then she opened a different tab. Not for any dramatic reason. Not because a motivational quote found her at the right moment. She opened it because there was a specific gap in her ad targeting she had been meaning to investigate for 2 weeks, and she was suddenly, inexplicably unable to leave it unexamined. 1 tab became 3. 3 became a 2-hour deep dive into a customer behavior pattern she hadn't considered. By 4 in the morning, she had rebuilt her entire targeting structure from scratch and scheduled a new test campaign to run at dawn. She never applied for that job. She never opened that bookmark again. But she also never forgot what 4 hours of honest doubt actually felt like, because that feeling became the most useful data point she would ever collect about herself. What if the single thing standing between where you are and where you are desperate to get to is not money, not connections, not a degree, not even talent, but one specific skill that nobody in your entire educational history ever sat down and taught you deliberately? Because that is not a rhetorical question. That is exactly what Maya discovered during the 2 weeks following that February night, and what she found when she looked directly at it changed the entire architecture of how she operated from that point forward. The rebuilt targeting campaign she had launched at 4 in the morning performed. Not spectacularly, but cleanly, measurably, in a way that told her the problem had never been the product or the market. The problem had been her relationship with data. Specifically, her tendency to collect it without interrogating it. She had been reading her analytics the way most people read terms and conditions, eyes moving across the information without genuine comprehension, extracting only the surface numbers while the deeper patterns sat untouched underneath. Revenue up, revenue down, ads performing, ads not performing. She had been treating complexity like a summary, and then wondering why her decisions kept hitting ceilings. What she taught herself over the following 3 weeks was not a tool or a platform or a trendy framework with a 3-letter acronym. It was the practice of sitting inside uncomfortable data long enough to let it tell its actual story rather than the story she was hoping it would tell. It sounds almost embarrassingly simple stated plainly like that. But execute it consistently under financial pressure, when the numbers are not moving in your favor and your family is in the next room discussing your sister's latest professional achievement, and it becomes one of the rarest disciplines in any room you will ever walk into. Here is why this matters so specifically for anyone building something outside the traditional path, and pay close attention to this because it applies far beyond e-commerce, far beyond digital business, far beyond Maya's particular situation. Institutions teach you to perform competence. They grade you on outputs, the assignment submitted, the exam passed, the interview cleared. What they do not teach you, what no syllabus has ever successfully bottled, is the ability to stay intellectually honest with yourself when staying honest is inconvenient. When the data says your instinct was wrong. When the market says your timing was off. When the numbers say the story you told yourself last month needs to be completely rewritten. That capacity to update without collapsing, to be corrected by reality without being destroyed by it, is the actual engine underneath every sustainable success Maya would go on to build. She began applying it to everything. Not just her ad campaigns but her product selection process, her pricing logic, her content strategy as her personal brand began quietly taking shape alongside the e-commerce operation. Every assumption got stress tested. Every result got interrogated past its first layer. She started keeping a private document she called her error log. Not a journal, not a vision board, just a clean running record of every decision that underperformed and the specific reasoning she had used to make it. Reading it back monthly was uncomfortable in the specific way that only genuinely useful things are uncomfortable. And here is what that document produced that no motivational framework ever could: pattern recognition about her own blind spots. She discovered she consistently overestimated speed and underestimated depth. She discovered she made her worst decisions in the 48 hours after a strong result, when confidence tipped quietly into carelessness. She discovered that her best ideas arrived not during dedicated strategy sessions but during the 20 minutes after she stopped trying to have ideas at all. Nobody taught her any of that. No classroom had a module on it. No family dinner ever surfaced it as a life skill worth developing. But it was already turning into the most valuable thing she owned. Have you ever reached a number you had been chasing for so long that when it finally appeared on your screen, your first reaction wasn't celebration? It was a very still, very private kind of disbelief, like your brain needed an extra few seconds to confirm that reality had actually caught up with everything you've been building toward in the dark? Because that is the only accurate way to describe the morning Maya opened her dashboard 14 months after that rebuilt targeting campaign and saw a monthly net figure that matched, to within $300, Exactly what Priya was taking home from the firm every month. She did not scream. She did not call anyone. She sat at her desk in that same childhood bedroom, in a different hoodie because the heating had finally been fixed, and she read the number 4 times. Then she closed the laptop, made herself a coffee, drank it standing at the kitchen window watching the neighbor's dog investigate something in the frost-covered grass, and thought about absolutely nothing for approximately 6 minutes. That specific blankness was not emptiness. It was the mental equivalent of a system reboot, her brain quietly archiving everything that had happened between that Sunday dinner table laugh and this particular Tuesday morning, cataloging it into something she could carry without it being heavy. The money itself was important, but it was not the point, and this distinction matters enormously for anyone listening who is measuring their own progress purely in financial terms. The number on that dashboard was significant not because of what it could buy but because of what it scientifically, mathematically, irrefutably disproved. It disproved the casual laugh. It disproved the pitying silence. It disproved every well-meaning warning about stability and sensibility, and the importance of a career path with a recognizable name. Numbers don't argue. They don't get emotional. They don't need to raise their voice. They simply sit there, patient and permanent, and wait for the room to go quiet around them. But here is the layer beneath the milestone that nobody ever discusses honestly. And this is where Maya's story takes a turn that most success narratives deliberately edit out. Reaching Priya's income level did not produce the feeling she had privately anticipated for 2 years. There was no catharsis, no closing of a loop. What arrived instead was something far more disorienting. The sudden sharp awareness that she had been using the comparison as a measuring stick for so long that she hadn't fully developed a set of personal metrics to replace it with. She had been running toward a specific marker, and had not spent enough time thinking about what the landscape looked like on the other side of it. That realization sent her back to her error log with a completely different set of questions. Not what had gone wrong, but what she actually wanted. Not how to match something external, but what an internal definition of progress even looked like for her specifically. It was the first time since that dinner table that she sat with a question that had nothing to do with proving anyone wrong, and the unfamiliarity of it was genuinely startling. Meanwhile, the household dynamics had begun shifting in ways nobody was directly acknowledging. Her parents had noticed she was no longer anxious about money the way she had been during the difficult months. They noticed the quiet confidence that had replaced the defensive composure she used to wear around family discussions about careers. Her father had asked twice, in that carefully indirect way of his, whether the online work was going okay. Maya had answered both times with a single calm yes and changed the subject, not out of secretiveness, but because she understood instinctively that partial information creates more noise than silence. They were noticing. They just didn't have the full picture yet. And the full picture was still getting bigger. What happens to a relationship built on an unspoken hierarchy when the hierarchy quietly stops being accurate? Because that is the precise structural question underneath everything that happened between Maya and Priya on a Thursday evening in March. A conversation that neither of them had planned, that started in a kitchen over 2 cups of tea going cold, and that permanently altered the way they understood each other and themselves. Priya had driven over unannounced, which was unusual enough on its own. She was a person who scheduled things, calls, visits, even casual check-ins carried a calendar invite. Unannounced was not in her operating vocabulary. Maya noticed the slight tension in her jaw before she'd even closed the front door, the way her eyes moved around the room without landing anywhere with intention, the specific quality of restlessness that belongs to someone who has been rehearsing something in their head during the entire drive over, and is now suddenly uncertain whether to say it at all. They made tea. They talked about nothing consequential for 11 minutes. Maya counted, because she could feel something pressurized sitting beneath the surface of the conversation, and she had learned enough about her own patience by this point to simply let it find its own timing rather than reaching for it. Then Priya set her mug down, looked at the table rather than at Maya, and said she needed to ask something without it becoming a whole thing. Maya said okay, and Priya asked with a directness that clearly cost her something to produce, whether Maya was actually making real money. Not hobby money, not side income, but real sustainable this is my life money. The question landed in the room and stayed there for a moment. Maya answered it honestly and without theatrics. She told Priya the monthly figure from her most recent quarter. She watched her sister's face process that number through several distinct expressions in rapid succession, surprise first, then something more complex that took longer to identify, then a very careful neutrality that Priya assembled around herself the way you assemble composure when you need it structurally rather than genuinely. What Maya had just described was not hobby money. It was not side income. It was, by a measurable margin, more than Priya was currently earning at the firm. What came next was not what Maya had imagined during the years she had occasionally, privately rehearsed versions of this conversation. There was no congratulation. There was no immediate warmth. What came was something rawer and more honest than either of those things. Priya told her quietly that she hadn't slept properly in 4 months, that she had been billing 70-hour weeks since January, that she had missed 3 things she cared about in the past 6 weeks alone because the firm's timeline had consumed her personal calendar without asking, that she had been sitting in her car outside the office on a specific Wednesday 2 weeks ago, completely unable to make herself go inside. Not out of laziness but out of a bone-level exhaustion that frightened her because she didn't know how to explain it to anyone whose approval she depended on. She had not told their parents any of this. She had not told her friends, most of whom measured their own progress against hers, and would have found the information destabilizing. She was telling Maya because Maya was the only person in her life currently operating outside the system Priya had built her entire identity inside of, and that outside position, which had once looked like a deficit, had started looking from where Priya was sitting like something else entirely. Maya didn't offer a solution. She didn't pivot the conversation toward her own journey, or use the moment as a platform for anything she'd been waiting to say. She just stayed in it with her sister, fully present, while the tea went completely cold and the kitchen got quieter and something between them that had been misaligned for years slowly, carefully began to straighten. Have you ever achieved something you worked devastatingly hard for, and then spent a significant amount of time afterwards sitting with a feeling you couldn't immediately name? Not regret exactly, not disappointment exactly, but something that lived in the uncomfortable territory between the two and refused to resolve itself into either? Because that is the conversation Maya had never allowed herself to have publicly, and it is the one that matters most to anyone who is currently in the middle of building something and wondering why the process feels lonelier than they anticipated. The business was growing. The numbers were moving in a direction that would have been unrecognizable to the girl sitting in a cold bedroom watching a break-even month swallow 3 weeks of effort. Her personal brand had developed an audience that was engaged and growing steadily. Digital product revenue had begun compounding in the specific way that passive income actually behaves when you've built the infrastructure correctly. Not the fantasy version, but the real version that still requires constant maintenance and strategic attention while simultaneously generating returns that no hourly rate can mathematically replicate. By every external measure available, Maya was succeeding. But here is what the external measure doesn't capture. And this is the part that gets edited out of most success stories because it complicates the clean narrative arc that audiences are supposed to find inspiring. The years of building had consumed relationships in ways that couldn't be fully recovered. A close friendship from university had thinned to occasional messages because Maya had canceled too many plans during the critical scaling period, and eventually the invitations had quietly stopped arriving. A relationship she had genuinely valued had ended during the difficult months not because of any dramatic incompatibility, but because she had been so thoroughly absorbed in rebuilding her business model that she had shown up emotionally absent for long enough that the other person had made a completely reasonable decision to stop waiting for her to return. She had made those trade-offs consciously, which is the detail that complicates any attempt to frame them as simply the collateral damage of ambition. She had chosen the late nights over the social events. She had chosen the strategy sessions over the check-in calls. She had made those choices with open eyes and a clear head, which meant she couldn't assign the losses to circumstance. They belonged to her fully, as decisions made under a specific set of priorities. That ownership was important to her. But ownership doesn't cancel the weight of what you're holding. There was also something more interior and harder to articulate. An identity displacement that arrived gradually and without announcement. She had spent so many consecutive months defining herself primarily through the lens of what she was building that she had let other parts of herself go unattended for long enough that they had grown unfamiliar. The things she had loved before, the obsessive focus, reading for no productive reason, cooking without timing anything, existing in an afternoon without an agenda attached to it, had started feeling like luxury she hadn't earned rather than basic human experiences she was simply entitled to. She had internalized the grind so completely that rest had stopped feeling like recovery and started feeling like negligence. Recognizing that pattern cost her 3 weeks of deliberate, uncomfortable recalibration. Not a breakdown, nothing that cinematic. Just a slow, honest audit of who she was outside the business and whether that person had been given enough room to remain someone she actually recognized. The audit was overdue. The findings were humbling. The adjustments were quiet and unsexy and produced no content and no milestone and no number on a dashboard. But they produced something that would carry everything else forward without fracturing under the weight, a version of Maya that the success belonged to, rather than a version of Maya that the success had simply happened to. That difference, it turned out, was not minor. Have you ever watched someone's entire framework for understanding you collapse in real time? Not violently, not with argument or confrontation, but in the specific, irreversible way that happens when a fact presents itself so plainly that every assumption built around it simply has nowhere left to stand? Because that is what happened on a Saturday afternoon in September, in a moment that Maya had not engineered, had not rehearsed, and had absolutely not planned to happen the way it did, which is precisely why it hit the way it did. Her mother had asked to borrow her phone. This was not unusual. Her mother borrowed her phone periodically to make calls when her own battery had run down, a habit Maya had never thought twice about. She handed it over without looking up from her laptop, where she was halfway through reviewing a campaign performance report that required her full attention. Her mother made the call. The call ended, and then there were approximately 8 seconds of silence that had a completely different texture from ordinary silence, the kind of silence that has weight and direction, that is moving towards something rather than simply occupying space. Maya looked up. Her mother was holding the phone with both hands, which was not how she had been holding it during the call. She was looking at the screen with an expression Maya had no existing category for. Not the careful neutrality from family dinners, not the warm pride she reserved for Priya's achievements, not concern, not confusion. Something that had not fully assembled itself into a readable emotion yet. Like a sentence that had started but not found its ending. The banking app had been open in the background. Her mother had accidentally navigated to it after the call ended. The current balance was visible on the screen. Maya didn't move. She didn't speak. She didn't reach for the phone or offer an explanation or fill the silence with anything at all. She had spent 3 years operating in the discipline of allowing data to tell its own story without interference. And she applied that same discipline now, completely still, completely present, letting the moment be exactly as large as it actually was without shrinking it through nervous management. Her mother set the phone down on the table between them. She sat down in the chair across from Maya slowly, the way people sit when their legs have made a decision slightly ahead of the rest of them. And then she said nothing for a duration that Maya would later estimate at close to 2 full minutes, but which felt, in the living of it, like something that existed outside of normal time entirely. Her father appeared in the doorway, drawn by the quality of the silence the way people are sometimes drawn by a sound they can't identify. He looked at Maya's mother. He looked at Maya. He looked at the phone on the table. He did not ask what had happened because the room had already answered that question without words. What followed was not a dramatic confrontation. There were no tears, no speeches, no formal acknowledgement delivered in full sentences. What happened was quieter and more permanent than any of those things. Her father pulled out the chair beside her mother and sat down. Her mother looked at the table. Her father looked at his hands. And in that shared, unscripted silence, something passed between the three of them that none of them had the vocabulary to name directly, but that all of them felt with complete clarity. The specific sensation of a long-standing story being retired without ceremony, not because anyone had won or lost, but because reality had simply outgrown the version of events everyone had been carrying. Maya closed her laptop. Nobody laughed. And the quiet that replaced that old laugh was the most eloquent thing that had ever been said in that room. When was the last time someone who genuinely hurt you, not out of malice but out of their own limitation, sat down, looked you in the eye, and delivered a full, clean, unconditional apology? Because if your answer involves any real length of waiting, you are in the majority. And if you have built any part of your forward momentum on the expectation that the apology is coming, that the acknowledgement is eventually arriving, that the people who dismissed you will one day deliver the specific words that finally close the wound, then what Maya learned in the weeks following that silent Saturday afternoon is something you need to hear before you spend another day in that particular waiting room. Her parents never apologized. Not directly. Not with words assembled into the shape of an apology and delivered with the weight one. Her father made a comment 3 weeks later, during an ordinary weeknight dinner, about how he had always believed hard work produced results, a statement so carefully constructed to be simultaneously true and nonspecific that it functioned as a bridge between his old position and his new understanding without requiring him to formally acknowledge the distance he had just crossed. Her mother began asking about the business with genuine curiosity rather than polite tolerance. Questions about how things worked, what the growth looked like, whether Maya needed anything she didn't currently have. Those questions were the closest thing to an apology her mother's emotional vocabulary was capable of producing, and Maya understood that precisely. Here is the thing about people who operate from fear, and this requires a genuine shift in perspective to absorb fully, so stay with it. When her parents laughed at that dinner table 3 years earlier, they were not reacting to Maya. They were reacting to their own history. They were reacting to every risk that had cost them something, every bet that hadn't paid out, every moment in their own lives when the unconventional choice had produced a consequence nobody had adequately prepared them for. Their dismissal was an autobiography, not a verdict. It was the sound of two people who had survived by clinging to certainty, projecting that survival strategy onto the person they loved most, and were most afraid of losing to a bad outcome. Understanding that doesn't erase the sting of the original moment. It doesn't retroactively make the laugh comfortable to remember. But it does something more structurally useful than erasing it. It relocates the laugh from the category of personal rejection into the category of human limitation, and that relocation changes what you are required to carry going forward. You are no longer carrying evidence of your own inadequacy. You are carrying evidence of theirs, and evidence of theirs is not your weight to hold. Maya made a decision during those weeks that she has described as the quietest and most significant thing she did that entire year. She decided to stop measuring her parents' evolution on a timeline that served her need for resolution, and start allowing it to move at the pace their own capacity permitted. This was not passive acceptance. It was an active, deliberate choice to remove her sense of wholeness from their ability to deliver a specific response. Her wholeness was not stored in their apology. It never had been. She had simply been behaving as though it was, and that behavior had been costing her a low-grade, continuous expenditure of energy that she hadn't fully accounted for until she stopped spending it. What replaced the waiting was not indifference. It was something warmer and more honest than indifference. A genuine, unperformed softness toward two people who had crossed an ocean on nothing but hope, raised 2 daughters with everything they had, and loved both of them in the only language their experience had taught them. That language had limitations, but it was never, not once, anything other than love. What does it look like when the person who represented everything you were measured against, the standard, the benchmark, the name spoken with reverence at every family gathering for a decade, sits across from you and asks you to teach her what you know? Because that question carries a specific gravity that no amount of professional success can fully prepare you for. And when it arrived, Maya discovered that her reaction to it was nothing close to what she would have predicted during any of the years she had spent building toward this moment from the outside. Priya had not made a sudden decision. That is the first thing to understand about what happened, because sudden decisions belong to a different kind of personality than the one Priya had spent 31 years constructing. She was a person who researched, deliberated, stress-tested, and built contingency frameworks before committing to anything consequential. Traits that had made her an effective lawyer and an exhausted human being in approximately equal measure. What she had actually done, Maya would later learn, was spend 4 months after their kitchen conversation conducting a private, systematic audit of her own life with the same analytical rigor she applied to her most complex cases. She had quantified her billable hours against her actual compensation and identified the precise point at which the exchange had stopped being rational by any financial metric she trusted. She had tracked her energy levels against her calendar and produced, for herself alone, a document that mapped in clinical detail exactly what the firm's demands were extracting from her physically and cognitively on a weekly basis. She had researched the digital business model Maya was operating, not superficially but thoroughly reading industry data, studying market trajectories, examining the specific mechanics of how passive income structures actually behaved over a 3 to 5 year horizon versus the linear salary progression her current path offered. And then she had called Maya on a Tuesday morning in April, 6 months after that silent Saturday with their parents, and said 4 words that restructured the entire dynamic that had existed between them since childhood. She said, "I am coming over." Not as a question, not with a calendar invite, just a statement of intent delivered with the quiet finality of someone who has finished deliberating and moved into the next gear. She arrived with a notebook, an actual physical notebook, the kind she used during complex case preparation, with section dividers and a pen clipped to the cover. She sat at Maya's desk, the same desk in the same childhood bedroom where everything had been built from the first uncertain product test to the current operation, and she asked Maya to start from the beginning. Not the emotional beginning, the technical beginning, the mechanics, the frameworks, the specific sequence of decisions that had produced the outcome she had spent 4 months examining from the outside. Maya looked at her sister, this woman who had carried the family's hope like a physical object across her entire adult life, who had optimized herself into exhaustion chasing a definition of success that had never actually been hers, who had sat in a car outside an office building unable to make herself go inside and had been privately terrified by what that meant, and felt something she had not expected to feel in this moment. Not vindication, not the satisfaction of a reversal she had privately imagined during the difficult years. What she felt was something simpler and far more valuable than either of those things. She felt genuinely glad her sister was in the room. Priya opened her notebook to the first clean page. Maya pulled her chair around to the same side of the desk, and the girl who had been laughed at began teaching everything she knew to the girl who had been celebrated, and neither of them mentioned the distance between where they had both started and where they were sitting right now. They didn't need to. The notebook was already filling up. What do you do with a laugh that was never meant to destroy you but nearly did anyway? What do you do with the specific memory of a moment where the people you loved most looked at the fullest, most honest version of your ambition and couldn't find a single reason to take it seriously? Because Maya has thought about that question more carefully than she has thought about almost anything else over the past 5 years, and the answer she arrived at is not the one she would have given you during any earlier chapter of this story, and that difference is the entire point. She does not carry that Sunday dinner as a wound anymore. She does not return to it when she needs motivation because motivation built on someone else's doubt is structurally unstable. It requires the doubt to remain alive in order to keep fueling you, which means you are perpetually dependent on a pain you should have long since outgrown. What she carries instead is something she extracted from the experience only after she had enough distance to see it clearly, the recognition that the laugh was never about her ceiling. It was about theirs. And ceilings are not transferable unless you consent to inherit them. Here is what 5 years of building something from nothing in a bedroom, against the current of every expectation her family and her culture and her social environment had assembled around her, actually produced. And this is not a list of revenue figures or audience numbers or business milestones, because those belong to Maya's specific story and your story will have its own metrics. What it produced was a quality of self-knowledge that is genuinely impossible to acquire any other way. You cannot read your way to it. You cannot shortcut your way to it through someone else's framework or course or coaching program. It is built exclusively through the specific process of making decisions that nobody validates, surviving the consequences when those decisions fail, and continuing anyway with the particular stubbornness of someone who has decided that external permission is a resource they can no longer afford to wait for. Priya is 6 months into building her own digital operation now. She has not quit the firm yet. She is doing this the way she does everything, methodically, with a transition timeline mapped across a spreadsheet that has 17 columns. Their parents ask about her progress at dinner with the same curiosity they now direct toward Maya. And the table that once held a single approved version of success has quietly expanded to accommodate something more honest and more varied than it was ever originally designed to hold. Nobody announced the change. It simply arrived the way most permanent things do, gradually then completely. And the laugh. That original, casual, completely unconsidered laugh from a Sunday dinner 5 years ago. Maya thinks about it differently now than she ever has before. Because here is the thing about being laughed at that nobody tells you when you are sitting in the freshest, most tender part of the dismissal. It is one of the most clarifying sounds you will ever hear. It tells you exactly where the edges of someone else's imagination are. It tells you precisely which direction their fear is facing. And it tells you, if you are paying the right kind of attention, exactly how much room exists just beyond the boundary of what they believe is possible, room that belongs to nobody yet, room that carries no competition, room that is available specifically and exclusively to the person willing to walk into it without waiting for an invitation. So if someone laughed at your dream recently, in a meeting, at a dinner table, in a text message, in the particular silence of someone who didn't even think your idea deserved a verbal response, then understand this clearly and carry it forward without flinching. That laugh just became the most expensive sound they will ever make. And you are only just getting started.